America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News 4 Jax goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
The war between Ukraine and Russia is at a critical crossroads. President Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are pushing to end the war. The reality is, in that push lies a dangerous fault line, and it opens further in Trump's rush to end the war. There may not be a quick fix because there are issues concerning both Ukrainian and European security. Not helping matters. Officials from Kyiv and Europe are excluded from talks. And the rift between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky deepens as they play a dangerous war of words. Donald Trump is gambling here, and he wants to move quickly. The question is, does he really care about some crucial matters, including Ukraine's ability to survive? For Europe, there are concerns about its borders and its security, and there are questions about rewarding Putin's illegal invasion in 2022. Welcome to Politics and Power. I'm Bruce Hamilton, and joining me is Stuart Kaufman, a specialist in international relations. The war between Ukraine and Russia, also his specialty. He is a political science professor at the University of Delaware. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Bruce.
So before I get to the escalating row between Trump and Zelensky and the President of the United States playing with the facts, let's talk about the move to negotiations and what's on the table. Things started with a call between Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two have talked at great lengths on the phone, according to Mr. Trump, and he said they discussed getting a ceasefire in the not-too-distant future. He said, "I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace. President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed." The conversation may have been as the president described, but it was something that sent the world into a tailspin. Will Trump's way pave the road to peace, in your opinion?
I really doubt it, Bruce. It's true to say that Zelensky wants peace and Putin wants peace, but it's the peace. What Putin wants is the peace of the robber who is mugging somebody, right? I'll be happy as long as you hand over all of your money. So that's a fundamental problem, is that what Putin wants and what Zelensky is willing to accept are not even in the same ballpark. So you can talk about peace all you want. There's not going to be an agreement if there's no basis for that agreement. And that puts aside the point that you already made, that these negotiations are primarily between Trump and Putin and leave out Ukraine entirely. You can't have a peace process that doesn't involve the parties that are actually involved in the fighting.
So that begs the question here, what is Trump doing?
So that is the big question. There are a few ways of looking at it. If you just focus on what Trump is doing, which is saying to Putin, well, it's okay, if you can go ahead and take some of Ukrainian territory, I don't care, which he is in fact saying. From that point of view, what's going on here is appeasement. And appeasement is a dirty word for conservatives for an excellent reason, because it's frankly a weak, cowardly, and self-destructive policy. It doesn't work because Putin's not going to stop. Right? Whatever you give Putin, he's going to demand more. So from an analytical point of view, that's what's happening. It's appeasement. What Trump thinks he's doing is something else. Part of what he thinks he's doing, I think, is the shakedown. Right? He's just saying to Zelensky, give me your minerals, and maybe I'll help you with your security problems, but maybe not. Right? The two interpretations are: one is the interpretation that Trump is weak and foolish. The other possibility is that Trump is just a criminal and he's engaging in theft. So, on the surface, those are the two most plausible, explanations.
And Donald Trump possibly has his own motivations, which you and I talked about Sunday night, and we'll discuss here on this show a little later on. Stuart, yesterday there was a stunning policy shift. The U.S. joined Russia to vote against the UN resolution condemning Russia's war against Ukraine. The U.S. actually aligned with Russia. John Bolton, the man who served as national security advisor during Trump's first administration, said that Trump effectively surrendered to Putin in the lead up to negotiations over the fate of Ukraine. Is Bolton right that Trump was played by Putin?
Well, I think Bolton is right that Trump effectively surrendered, right? That's the interpretation that this is appeasement. But I would actually go further, and I would say, look, if the United States is voting, on Russia's side, it voted against the UN resolution that condemned Russia for invading Ukraine, and voted instead for the resolution that Russia sponsored, right? So this goes beyond appeasement. This is actually switching sides. We're involved in a Cold War between the forces of freedom and the forces of tyranny, with the forces of tyranny led by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And what Trump is doing is switching sides in the war between tyranny and freedom, and aligning with the side of tyranny. That's what it looks like, when you consider all of his rhetoric, not just these UN votes, but also his completely false claim that somehow Ukraine is responsible for the fighting. And that includes his completely false claim that it would have been possible to make a deal to prevent the war. The Ukrainians offered a deal. President Biden offered a deal, and what Putin said was he demanded not only concessions from Ukraine, but concessions from NATO. He said that NATO had to pull back to where it was before 1997. So in other words, what Putin's position was before the war started was, I'm going to kill this hostage, Ukraine, unless you give me more hostages. And Putin hasn't backed off an inch from what he really wants, which is really to destroy NATO and dominate Europe. That's what's at stake here, and that's, I think, what Trump just doesn't get.
Yes, well, let's talk about the chess game that's going on. Russia occupies about a fifth of Ukraine and demands that Kyiv cede more territory and basically be rendered permanently neutral under any peace deal. On Air Force One the other day, the president said that Russia has the land. They hold the chips in any negotiations. Trump tells Zelensky, if we make a deal on minerals, maybe we can make something happen. Zelensky pushes back on that. So what's going to move the needle, if anything, here?
If by that you mean what's going to move us towards peace, again, I think the main point is that Trump misunderstands what's at stake. He thinks this is simply a land grab by Putin, and he thinks that he can stop the war easily just by giving in to Putin's demands on land, and the so-called neutrality. But again, what Putin is going for here goes far beyond what Trump seems to understand. Because he wants not only Ukrainian neutrality, but also disarmament. He wants Ukraine to voluntarily disarm, so that basically he can have get exactly the kind of deal that Hitler got in 1938 when the British and the French appeased him over the Czechoslovakia crisis. And the deal was, I will take part of Czechoslovakia now and the rest of Czechoslovakia later. Right. So that's what Putin's going for. And so nothing's going to move the needle until and unless Putin is given to understand that he's not going to get what he wants. So, the problem here is that Trump is acting weak exactly the moment when he needs to be standing strong against Putin. So that's the only way to peace.
So Trump doesn't think Zelensky is strong, but Zelensky steps in and throws a monkey wrench in here, and he says, all right, look, I'm ready to resign as president if it would guarantee peace, and he could swap it for NATO membership, which has already been taken off the table, and that Ukraine needs the strength of all of Europe, the strength of America, and the strength of everyone who wants a lasting peace. Noble, but given the climate, not pragmatic. Is that anything that would get the ear of Putin or Trump?
No, but it wasn't intended to. Zelensky's saying, look, it's not about me. Very much unlike Putin, very much unlike Trump, Zelensky is not primarily in it for his own power. He's in it to save his country. So what he's doing is turning the tables on them rhetorically, and saying, fine, you want to get rid of me? I'll resign in a heartbeat as long as my country is taken care of. If Ukraine is in NATO, that's the security guarantee I need, and I'll be happy to go. So yeah, no, it's not going to happen. But it was a shrewd rhetorical move by Zelensky to say, look, it's not about me. Don't make it about me. It's about Ukraine.
French President Macron met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office yesterday, tried to inject a dose of reality into the president's ambitions to end the war. We've already established that President Trump seems to misunderstand a lot about what's going on. Macron insists they want the same outcome of peace, but warned of Russia's poor track record in keeping its international commitments. He stressed the need for security guarantees, the need to check and verify things. He said, look, this cannot end with the surrender of Ukraine. Did any of that resonate with the president?
I didn't see the whole interview, but my sense is probably not. I think the moment that most illustrates that is the moment where Trump tried to claim that all of the money that the Europeans have given Ukraine is just loans, and Macron corrected him and said, no, we gave them that money. And Trump said, well, if you believe that, fine. Right. In other words, he wasn't willing to believe Macron even on what European policy was, let alone about anything else. So, yeah, my sense is that didn't resonate at all. Trump just wasn't in listening mode at all.
I did read where some analysts believe that Trump may be right in pushing for U.S. leadership in the negotiations, but Washington might have to be convinced of its role when it comes to Ukraine's security, and that essentially Europe has to convince the administration being a partner is going to strengthen its hand with Putin. Any chance of that happening?
It's really hard to know. It's hard to get into Trump's head and understand kind of, basically what he's going to do when he figures out that his current approach isn't working. In fact, it's completely backwards. Again, he's putting pressure on the wrong side. If he wants peace, he needs to pressure the Russians to scale back their ambitions first. It's true that the Ukrainian goals are also probably impractical, but the Russian goals are so expansive, so extreme, that's got to be what changes first. So he might get a ceasefire that lasts briefly, but it's not going to hold up because Putin's not ready to stop. So to me, the only thing that's going to that's going to move the needle towards peace is if and when Trump eventually figures out that Putin only wants peace, as he said, on his own terms, which means give me everything I want, which is far more than he's actually articulated. So yeah, Trump is going to be frustrated because he's not going to get what he wants.
Yeah, I think there's another reason that it's not going to be an easy task for Europe is because I guess Matthew Saville, who's the director of military sciences at the Royal United Services Institute, put it best. It's a London think tank. He said the U.S. is quite happy right now to march to its own beat and leave Europe and Ukraine to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, I think that's actually too optimistic a view from the perspective of Ukraine, at least, because basically Trump doesn't want to leave Europe. He wants to shake Europe down, right? So it's not just about demanding all these mineral rights from Ukraine. It's also the demand for Greenland. The tariffs that Trump has been directing against Canada and Mexico. Europe is next. He's actually said that it's in his sights. So I think it's over optimistic to say that Trump is going to leave Europe alone. I think Trump is looking for ways to exploit Europe And in the worst case scenario, he's going to join up with Putin and kind of divide and conquer and try to subdue Europe through diplomatic and economic pressure.
And maybe that vote yesterday just bears that out. When Politics and Power continues, fact-checking the president, what does Ukraine get, if anything, in peace negotiations? And what is it Donald Trump really wants out of all of this? It is not what you think. That and more when Stuart Kaufman and I return with more of Politics and Power. Welcome back to Politics and Power. My guest, international relations expert Stuart Kaufman from the University of Delaware. Stuart, Ukraine demands Russia withdraw from captured territory and says it must receive NATO membership or equivalent security guarantees to prevent Moscow from attacking again. Russia occupies, as we've said, about a fifth of Ukraine, demands Kyiv cede more territory, be rendered permanently neutral under any peace deal. What happens because Zelensky's wish list for a peace agreement was essentially discarded?
Well, what happens is that Zelensky is not going to get his wish list. I think that's beyond clear. The problem again is that Trump doesn't understand that that's not enough. That's just the starting point for Russian demands. So it's just not going to happen. And all of the other conversations that have been having around it, like the idea of Europeans sending in peacekeepers, is all just froth. It ignores the main point, which is that if to have a peace deal, the two sides who are in the fighting have to agree on what the terms of that deal are, and the two sides just couldn't be further apart. It's not just about the extra land that Russia wants. It's also that they want really total political control over Ukraine. Putin isn't going to be satisfied until there is a Russian puppet in power in Kyiv. That's and then he's interested in going further into west and towards Europe.
Yeah, so Zelensky says, look, I don't see a ready U.S. plan to end the war, and he worries that Putin will attack NATO next year. Do you see that as a real possibility?
I think it's unlikely. It's conceivable, but I would take that kind of figuratively. What Zelensky is saying is, if Putin gets all he wants out of Ukraine, which again means control over Ukraine politically, means Zelensky out, it means a Putin puppet in. What Zelensky is saying is Putin's not going to stop. And where he goes after next could easily be NATO member states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that the United States has a treaty commitment to defend, but that Trump has signaled he might not necessarily defend. Right. So again, the point is, so in that case, it's not going to happen next year, I don't think. But Zelensky is trying to make the point that, if Putin gets what he wants and manages to control Ukraine, that's not going to be enough for him. He's going to keep going, and NATO countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are in his sights.
So we know Trump says he wants to work together very closely with Putin to end the war. But I think the bigger question is, does Putin really want to work with Trump?
Putin wants to work with Trump, but peace isn't what he wants. Putin wants to work with Trump to see whatever he can get out of Trump. But of course, he knows better than to trust Trump, right? If Trump is willing to make concessions, he'll pocket them. But you can't trust any promise that Vladimir Putin makes. He's already shown he's not interested in the truth. He's not interested in keeping his promises. He's just interested in as much power as he can possibly grab.
Do you think that the end game for Putin is out of the cold and at the top of international politics?
That's what he hopes for. But Putin is not, living in a realistic world here. I mean, even with respect to Ukraine, what he doesn't understand is that even if he manages to put some kind of a puppet leader in charge of Ukraine, Russia in the long term cannot hold on to control of Ukraine because of Putin's own actions. By invading Ukraine twice, he has made Russia into the enemy of the Ukrainian people, and the Ukrainian people overwhelmingly feel that way. Putin understands correctly that without Ukraine, Russia is not really an empire. With Ukraine, it is. What he doesn't get is he's just made that impossible. So in the short run, over the course of a few years, Putin can cause a lot of trouble. He wants exactly what you've outlined. He wants to be at the top of the international heap. He wants to be dominating, world events. But Russia is just not in the same power category as the United States or as China is in terms of its economic strength, in terms of even of its population, which is shrinking. Russia's got a big military, but even that military, can't defeat the Ukrainians, let alone be a world beater. Putin wants those things, but he's not going to get them. The only question is how much more blood is going to be spilled before he's stopped.
So one Russian newspaper put it this way: Russia's ready for talks, but on its terms. If you drop the diplomatic language there, essentially, isn't that an ultimatum?
No, I wouldn't use the word ultimatum. I would say diktat, right? It's just trying to dictate his terms. We want peace as long as it's on our terms, as long as we get everything we want. And if you don't want to give him everything he wants, then he says, well, then you don't want peace, right? So again, it's just this upside down, world where Ukraine is supposed to apologize because they hit Putin's fist with their face.
Let's get back to something that we discussed a bit earlier and alluded to. What does Donald Trump really want out of all of this? Some global analysts question his motives. Is it a political triumph? Is it just any deal to gain a Nobel Peace Prize? Or is the real prize scoring a chance to engage one-on-one with a man he greatly admires, a global strongman, Vladimir Putin?
So I think certainly you're right that Trump's admiration for Putin is a big part of this. But it seems to me that when you analyze Trump's motive, you want to keep it simple. He wants very simple, basic things. He likes money, he likes power, and he likes to stoke his own ego. So I think a big part of this is revenge. Trump wants revenge because Zelensky wouldn't play along with him, back 4 years ago in trying to insinuate that Biden was engaged in corrupt activities, right? So because Zelensky told Trump no on that, Zelensky is on Trump's enemies list, so that in itself is a motivation, right? So number one is his ego. He wants revenge. Number two is money. Zelensky thought that by making a deal with involving Ukraine's natural resources, that he could basically buy Trump's support. But Trump is determined to extract every possible ounce of wealth out of Ukraine. Without, of course, offering very much in return. So the money is the other thing. But then the third thing is power. Again, I go back to this idea that Trump seems to be switching sides in the war between tyranny and freedom. And the reason for that is because Putin is an ideological ally for Trump. Trump said, before the election that he was going to be a dictator on day one. What that clearly implied, though his supporters denied it, was that he was going to be a dictator on every day after day one. And that's what Trump's trying to do. And Trump is trying to use the same kind of playbook that Putin has used to make himself a dictator out of a country that used to have more or less free elections. So I think it's about, most of all, Trump's ego, and second of all, Putin is an ally for Trump, ideologically at least, in his efforts to make himself as much of a dictator as he can.
Well, he posted on X, I almost said Twitter, X the other day, he's already alluded to running for a third term, and he said something about being king. Let's take this one step further and along these same lines. You and I had a chat over the weekend about an article in the New York Times and an observation by Stanford political scientist Francis Fukuyama. He said, quote, "The United States under Donald Trump is not retreating into isolationism. It is actively joining the authoritarian camp, supporting right-wing authoritarians around the world, from Vladimir Putin to Viktor Orban, Nayib Bukele to Narendra Modi." That is very right-wing. That's very authoritarian. It is a frightening proposition. Is Fukuyama right? Is the conclusion inescapable?
The funny thing is, I find myself agreeing today with people I usually disagree with vigorously. John Bolton is one, Frank Fukuyama is another. I think both of them have gotten a lot wrong, but on this one, I think Fukuyama is right. And again, what I would go to is, it's not just the foreign policy, right? The foreign policy by itself makes no sense, right? It's appeasement, it's weak, it's short-sighted, it's cowardly, it's self-defeating. So it makes no sense. The only way it makes sense is to put it in the context of Trump's domestic policy, where he is systematically dismantling all of the checks and balances that the founding fathers created to try to make sure that a president would not become a dictator. He is, bullied Congress into agreeing with him. He is attacking critics right and left. He is, trying to bully the media into not criticizing him. He is dismantling all the internal checks in the executive branch, starting with all of the inspectors general and judge advocate generals in the military. Everybody who's a lawyer whose job it is to tell him when he's doing something illegal or unconstitutional. He gets rid of those people because he doesn't want to be told that what he's doing is illegal.
I don't mean to interrupt. He doesn't seem to understand that there are laws out there, and even though he's in the executive branch, he's not beholden to them.
Unfortunately, the Supreme Court seems to agree with him, at least to some extent, that official acts of the president are not necessarily subject to scrutiny. That was, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I don't know the ins and outs of that, but they do seem to have given him a green light on a lot of what he's doing. But that said, he's going much further than he had previously. And courts are, to some extent, slowing him up in certain areas. I mean, it is clear that the standard view is what he's doing is unconstitutional in some cases, illegal in others. But that's not stopping him, right? So the question is, what will stop him? But to go back to our conversation, that's why Trump likes Putin. That's why he admires Putin, because Putin is the kind of dictator that Trump himself is trying to be. And so Trump is more interested in an alliance with Putin for his own personal power than he is in doing anything that's in the best national security interest of the United States.
Look, the stakes are huge. Analysts looking at history and the world believe a hurried peace deal that strengthens Russia and weakens European security by validating Putin's expansionism would likely sow the seeds for an even worse future war. Does Donald Trump understand that? Does Donald Trump care?
I think I agree with that analysis. I've kind of been making the same case. I think that is where we're headed. I think Trump doesn't understand that because I think he doesn't want to understand that. He's committed to seeing his own version of reality and not seeing any other version of reality until he's pushed to do otherwise. So he doesn't get it. The only question is, how much, how many world events are going to happen before he comes to understand that he's not getting what he wants and he has to change course.
We don't have a crystal ball. Where does push come to shove? Where does this go?
Well, I don't know. I mean, let me give you the optimistic scenario, which is the only one I can bring myself to think about. So you can imagine that, again, this minerals deal is really an important part of this whole story. If the minerals deal, the details of which are not yet clear, but if it includes basically a provision that Ukraine will continue to get all the weapons that it needs to defend itself, it's just going to have to pay for it with these mineral rights. If that's the core of the deal, then you can get a situation where Ukraine continues to have the ability to defend itself. And then, it becomes clear to Trump that Putin is the problem, that Putin is really the obstacle to peace, that Putin is getting in the way of the, of Trump's, Nobel Prize, if you want to think about it that way. And at that point, you could hope that Trump, who's nothing if not unreliable, will hopefully switch sides and start rightly blaming Putin for the war, and
Caleb, did we lose him on Zoom? I think we had a little technical freeze there. We'll work to get him back. So basically what Stuart Kaufman is saying is that the key to everything might be this minerals deal here as we work to get him back. And, is it money that is the motivator for Donald Trump? Does he see it that if Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is willing to go ahead and pay the United States back for some of the weapons that we've been providing to help defend Ukraine, then maybe Donald Trump will sit back and say, okay, we're willing to go ahead and continue to play ball in helping Ukraine to go ahead and continue in helping them survive in this world today. And then Donald Trump would say, okay, maybe Vladimir Putin is not the one that I want to have on his side right now. I don't know. Does it become pay for play in the grand scheme of things right here? I guess time will essentially tell. I'm hoping that Stuart Kaufman zooms back in here so we can find out if, that's his understanding of the situation here on politics and power. It is certainly a very complicated situation. We do know that a lot of times what Donald Trump says and what he means are two different things. We know he considers himself to be a deal maker in every sense of the word. So sometimes we don't understand exactly what he's thinking and where he's going in the world of politics and in the world of deal making these days. So it remains to be seen exactly what he wants out of this situation. I was hoping we would get Stuart Kaufman back on here from the University of Delaware, an international relations expert who's provided some wonderful context, perspective, and focus on what is happening in this very intrinsic situation right now that involves Russia, the leaders of Europe, and the United States in a very critical situation that involves the very existence of Ukraine, the future of Volodymyr Zelensky as the president of Ukraine, and maybe the future of Europe and transatlantic relations between the United States of America and European leaders. We do know that Emmanuel Macron has been forced out as the leader of France, and that new leadership may take over there. We know that the leadership of Germany is in transition right now. There are so many dynamics that are at play in this situation as you look at a roundtable of European leaders trying to sort things out in this very complicated world in which we live. So I'm just going to have to assume at this point that it is a situation in which it may very well be pay for play that may change the dynamic of things. Do appreciate you watching this edition of Politics and Power. Time will certainly tell, and nobody does have a crystal ball as this complicated situation seems to change hour by hour and certainly day by day. You can watch on demand Politics and Power on News4Jax's YouTube channel and news4jax.com. I appreciate your time.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.